Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our sound video session. Just a little slow on the fader there this morning, but we got it worked out here, it looks like. Welcome. I hope everyone's doing well. For those in the United States, happy Labor Day weekend. I imagine the crowd will be a little bit thinner this week because it is a holiday weekend here in the U.S., but it's great to have you all here. Hope everyone's staying cool and dry and well. So let's go ahead and go over to our agenda and we'll take a look at what we have going today. First up, we're going to take a look at loudness meters, a little bit different than peak meters and even VU meters. So we'll talk about what loudness is first of all, and then take a look at a variety of different meters, one hardware and several software options as well. And then we will jump into our question and answer session. So let's go ahead and jump into the hardware meters. Let's go to our overhead cam here. I'm actually going to turn off my hair light here because it's just creating this glare. So 1 second. That's better. Okay. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about, this is a hardware version. There are software versions of loudness meters as well. This one is kind of interesting from the standpoint that it could be used for live events where you feed a digital feed of the audio into the back of the meter here at the end of the signal chain, or as close to the end of the signal chain as you can, and that'll give you an opportunity to kind of manage your loudness here by watching the levels over time. So we'll come back to that one in just a minute, but let me first of all talk about what loudness is. And to do that, we're going to switch over to our Mac, and the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, is an organization that helps establish standards for broadcast. And in this case, there is the, it's kind of hard to read this, so let me just see if I can make it bigger here. So the broadcast sound section is represented by standards that have the BS, or I guess it's a publication, I should say, have the BS designation. And this one is the 1770-4 designation. This outlines loudness units full scale. So it is a worthwhile document to download. I put a link for this in the description, and it comes in a variety of different languages here. I would recommend that you download it and take a look at it. Here is kind of the high level. This document actually makes a case for, first of all, why loudness metering is a good idea, why it's necessary for broadcast, certainly radio and television and so on and so forth. But it also, in addition to making that case, it also establishes exactly what's happening in the loudness unit's full-scale metering algorithm. And so we'll come back to that. That's what Annex 1 here is. That's the actual specification. But here it lays out the reasons for, basically why do we need loudness units full scale? And I remember back in, I think it was 2010 or 11 or 9, I can't remember, somewhere in that time frame. But there was the United States Congress actually passed a law called, I think it was called the Calm Act. And basically there were a lot of complaints that commercials played on TV a whole lot louder than the programs did. So whatever you're tuned in to watch, you would have the volume on your TV set at a certain level, and then a commercial would come on and it would come on ridiculously louder. And so in addition to the already sort of inbuilt response in most of us to mute the television during the ads, they played them a lot louder then too. So in any case, what the act was is it said, hey, we need to kind of standardize this. We have to, first of all, come up with a standard for how loud things should be, and then the commercials are supposed to adhere to that as well as the program. So that was kind of the idea here, at least the story here in the United States. ITU, of course, establishes that at a much broader level. And so essentially what loudness units full scale is doing, and the full name I believe is loudness units relative to full scale. That's what LUFS stands for. You'll also sometimes see LKFS, which is loudness units K-weighted relative to fullness scale, or relative to full scale, not fullness. Basically, they're measuring the same thing, but the ITU, or the EBU, excuse me, made the case that from their perspective, LUFS is actually a more accurate term to use. So it's usually the term I refer to, although you will see LKFS. And in fact, the ITU BS 1770-4 standard actually specifies that the targets for broadcast television, for example, should be minus 23 LKFS. You can interchange that. It could be, you can call it LUFS as well. It's measuring basically the same thing. So what it does is it basically applies a K weighting. If you're not familiar with weightings essentially, there are a whole bunch of different types of weightings. There's A weighting, and you'll typically see that in a lot of the specifications for audio equipment. So for example, for a microphone, when they're measuring the self noise, they will apply an A weighting to the signal before they make their measurement. So this is just a different kind of weighting, and the idea is that different weightings will more closely represent like the hearing capabilities of humans, for example. That there are certain frequencies that we hear more adeptly than others, and so the idea is to kind of account for that in some fashion, and that's what the weighting does. It is also measuring an average level, so it is doing a mean square calculation, and let me actually kind of illustrate what that means and what that's all about here. So here, I'll bring this back up in just a minute, but here we have some audio, and what I want to do here is let me just highlight a portion of, this is dialogue audio here, so I'll just highlight that. This is a series of phrases, and we'll come into our amplitude statistics and scan that. I'm going to make this a lot bigger. That helps. Okay. So what we can see here is, if I go ahead and scan this selection, you can see the audio is coming in. If you look at the ITURB S1770, this is actually the -3 loudness. They've tuned it over time. We're now on the version 4 of this standard. But this is coming in close to -17. It's -16.57 LUFS for that dialogue audio right there. And then the total RMS amplitude, which is root mean square. Root mean square is just a very simple way of averaging over time. And this comes in at -19.56. Okay, so that's great. Why don't we just use RMS instead of this fancy LUFS or LKFS? That's a question some people ask. Well, let me illustrate why. If I highlight some dialogue that also happens to have some air quotes silence in it and do this measurement again, now the RMS comes in at -22. However, the overall LUFS reading stays pretty close to where it was. It doesn't change a whole lot. So in essence, what's happening is LUFS or LKFS is taking into account the fact that during dialogue, there can be natural pauses and no talking for a period of time, but that shouldn't unnecessarily reduce the overall measurement. Okay, so the talking is just as loud, whether there are pauses between them or not, between phrases. But if with root mean square, it really pulls the average down when you have these, air quote, silent sections. And so that's why RMS on its own is not a really great measure. Nevertheless, let's go back over here. They're doing a mean square, essentially here, to measure the loudness over time, but they're doing some additional things. They're actually gating out the silent section. So there's actually two gates. One is at -70 LKFS, and then there's a second one, -10 dB, relative to the level measured after application of the first threshold. So don't want to get too much into the details here, but the idea is that LUFS and LKFS essentially prevent silent portions between dialogue phrases from unnecessarily reducing the overall loudness measure. And the idea is that this will more closely measure how we as humans hear. So that's why we use these loudness metering techniques. Okay, let's see. Did I cover everything I wanted to there? I think so. Here's just a real quick, take a look at this really quickly. So this is the TC Electronic Clarity M loudness meter. The idea, again, as I mentioned before, let me just skip ahead here, show you some things. I'm connected currently with a USB connection to my computer. So that's what we actually saw when I showed you the meter earlier on. But there are also a variety of other ways you can connect this. And the idea, again, is that you need to feed it a signal that's already digitized, because that way it can then have a reference level. It already has the audio encoded into a digital full-scale format, and so it has a reasonable way to know, okay, this is already in digital full-scale format, so we can be confident that we don't have any sort of calibration problem between whatever audio equipment we're connecting to our meter and the meter itself. So if I were to connect, long-winded way of saying, if I just fed an analog signal into the audio meter, the problem is that we'd have to have some way to account for what strength of signal, analog signal, we were sending the meter. And this is a problem we actually talked about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about calibrating the levels between your mixer and your camera or whatever other equipment downstream you're sending the audio to. So hopefully that makes sense. So all of the interfaces are digital here. You can connect via USB, and then I'll show you how you actually make that USB connection work. There are other connections you can use as well. So there's some digital AES connections over BNC connectors that you can use as well. So if your mixer outputs that, you can use that. You can also, there are also some other, there's a 1/4 inch and for SPDIF, and we'll talk about what those are. And then there's also an optical input. So if you use an optical, what's called a TOS cable or a TOS link cable, TOS refers to Toshiba link, and it's just an optical cable. In fact, if we switch back over to our overhead camera here, I'll show you one. So this is an optical cable, and it has this specific connector. Let me just pull the cover off here really quickly. The cover, or the connector, looks something like this. And TOSLink was specifically designed by Toshiba originally to allow you to interconnect, say, for example, a CD player to a receiver. It's a consumer standard. Basically, it can carry 2 channels of digital audio. It can be hot plugged, so you don't have to turn off the devices when you're connecting them up. Works pretty well. The cables can only go about, I think, anything beyond 10 meters or so it becomes problematic with the kind of consumer grade. They're usually using plastic fibers within the consumer grade cables, but you can get also glass cables as well. In any case, TOSLink is what it's called. Let's go back over here to the Mac. Here's another picture of what that looks like here. Up a little bit closer than I was able to show you. But again, this was originally established by Toshiba. It's using the kind of connector is actually called, it has a very technical name. What is it again? EIAJ optical. So that's that's what that is. But it's important to remember that this is actually separate from ADAT light pipe. An ADAT light pipe actually uses the exact same connectors and an optical cable as well. However, it's using a different protocol. So whereas the TOSLink is using basically SPDIF digital over optical, and SPDIF stands for, this is something I just learned. I always thought that, what a crazy name. What in the world does that mean? SPDIF stands for Sony Panasonic Digital Interface. So it was a standard put together by Sony and Panasonic, and it's just a digital, it's a way of conveying or transferring digital audio from one piece of equipment to another. Typically, SPDIF is done over just a regular coaxial cable with an RCA connector. So in the case of TOSLink, it's actually the same exact protocol, except it's using optical instead. So that's the difference there. However, ADAT light pipe is different entirely. And ADAT light pipe is different from the standpoint that it can transfer, I believe, up to 8 channels of audio on a single connector. And it can go up to 192 kilohertz, although you can't do as many channels at 192 kilohertz as you can at the lower sample rates. But overall, it's a different protocol. And so what I learned, if we go back to the overhead camera here, is that this actually takes TOSLink and not ADAT light pipe. So that was my mistake. But I do have a SPDIF output on my Universal Audio Apollo X6, and I connect it via that with its breakout cable. So that's enough in the weeds on that. I know that's one of Danny's favorite terms there, least favorite terms, excuse me. But didn't want to get too caught in the details there. But this is essentially a hardware meter, and I want to show you how we set that up to work on the computer here. So let's go back over to the Mac. Here I have an app called Audio Hijack. Many of you are familiar with this. Excuse me. So essentially what this does is it captures the audio coming out of one app, and it can send it to another app, or it can apply, in this case, a plugin, and this is a VST plugin. Or actually it's an audio units plugin. So a VST or in this case it's an audio units, just a different standard. So it's running the audio through this Clarity M plugin, which then sends the information via USB over to the hardware meter. is the idea. Let me get a sip of water here. I'm just about ready for something like that. Give me just 1 second. So I'm going to mute myself in the ATEM software control. All right, we're back here. Let's go back to audio hijack. Whoops, I passed it. There we go. All right. So this is, so what's happening here is when I play sound through the music app, it is routed to the Clarity M plugin, which then sends the information off to the hardware meter. And then it also outputs, in this case, the decimator, which is a cross converter that we're using to get the audio out of the Mac and into the live stream, just so you're aware of what that's all about. Okay, and then all I have to do is once I've set that up, I turn it on. Let's bring up our music app. I'm going to go ahead and play some music for you, and we're going to switch over to the hardware meter and watch what happens. Okay, I'm going to keep that playing. I'm just fading it on the live stream itself. The music is still playing at its full volume here. What I can do now is once I have this hardware meter, one of the things I was trying to do for the live stream, for example, is to get the audio coming out of the music app at a pretty close to what my voice is at. So we didn't have that experience where the intro and outro music is ridiculously loud, and then everyone has to go and change their volume once the host starts talking on the show. So that was the main idea here. And what we were able to do is we set our target to minus 23 LUFS. You can see it's actually coming in a little bit quieter than that. The song is the kind of song that has a build. So right now it's actually sort of in a, it's I don't know, it's transitioning. It's a bridge or something in the song, and now it's going to another verse here. And it will eventually come out pretty close to 23. So that's the idea. That's one way you can use it. Now, what this meter does is on the outside ring here of the radar, that is actually a loudness units full scale on a short-term basis. It's almost acting like a peak meter, but it's measuring loudness units full scale. And then inside is the loudness units full scale over time. So the radar this is a 12-minute window. And so that's what you're seeing on the radar itself. And the target, of course, is minus 23, which we set right here. We can change that. If we wanted to say, hey, we want this to be actually down at minus 28, you can see it adjusts that for us. Or if we wanted to go in a lot louder, a lot hotter, we could come in at minus 19 LUFS, and you can see we're way off the target at this point. So the idea is you basically want the audio to come up to that first ring is about where you're aiming to get it. That first ring from the outside. Now we also have a regular peak meter over on this side, just a left-right peak meter. We have a dB, this is actually a dB true peak meter. We have our true peak max here. So again, true peak is a concept that goes along with the loudness units full scale standard. It is a way of measuring the peak level in digital audio, which accounts for the fact that audio can sometimes on playback, if you're playing back through an analog system, the amplitude could actually go higher than any of the individual samples go. And the reason for that is if you have two samples next to each other, let's go back to our main camera here. Say on an audio waveform I have two samples next to each other, but the waveform is coming up, it'll extend in the analog realm, it'll extend beyond those two and come back down to the next sample. So true peak is trying to account for that fact that the actual waveform in reality, in the analog world, would actually extend beyond the true, or the actual value, the amplitude value of these two samples. So that's kind of the idea there. All right, let me go back to the meter here. A couple of other things. This one's kind of nice because it does other things too. You have a real-time analyzer. I need to restart the music here. So here's the intro where there's not a lot of bass going on. You can see it just sort of has that. Let me bring up the levels here so you can hear it. Now there's a lot more bass. And I'll pull that back down. So you can see that represented here. A lot more bass here. If you've got a subwoofer, this song cranks out a lot of that. So it also has a scope. This is for evaluating stereo coherency, I believe. That's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but that is also a possibility here. This one is capable actually of monitoring up to 5.1 surround. We don't have it set up for that, of course, but it can do that as well. So there's a look at a hardware meter. Let's take a look at some software meters as well, which I think are important. So we'll switch back over to our Mac here, and I'm going to, let me just pull the music down. Okay. We're going to stop our music. We're going to need that at the end of the show, so we're going to rewind it. There we go. Okay, coming into Audition. All right, so in Audition, this is pretty interesting here. If I actually go back over to my effects rack, what happened in my, oh, here it is. This looks familiar. This is actually licensed by Adobe from TC Electronic, and it's the exact same meter we were looking at before. So it does the exact same thing. It has the loudness radar. As I play this back here, here we go. Is it playing? I need to go check my audio hardware settings. It's got the decimator. Okay, for whatever reason, Adobe is being truculent here. But the idea is you play it back and it does the exact same thing that we were seeing before. And of course, you can also, offline, you can measure it as well. If I just wanted to measure the entire program loudness, the entire loudness of the entire clip, I just highlight the entire thing and it will give me that loudness units full scale reading right there, as well as the dB true peak, in this case, minus 1.52. So Adobe Audition has this built in, so that's a really nice addition as well. Over here in DaVinci Resolve, we have a similar thing. This is actually a loudness meter over here, and you can see it's using, in this case, we can change it to BS 1770-4 loudness units. And what you do here is you set your target over in the project settings. So here, for example, I've already processed this audio at minus 17 LUFS, so I set the target here to minus 17 LUFS. Now as I play that back, we'll go ahead and reset and start the meter. And it's not playing out because we don't have it configured, but it is measuring it here on the loudness meter. So just for the live stream, we didn't have it set up to do the, we can do the, let's see, it's here in the preferences. We have our audio. Oh, we don't have it, we don't have the plugin applied. But the idea, well, we don't need it applied here in this case. Anyway, what you do is you basically play it through. The weakness with loudness meters like this, I mean, they're great and they're very useful, but they measure only what you tell it to measure, and they don't measure offline. So they're only measuring while you're playing the audio back. So that's a little bit of a challenge there for when you, say, for example, are working on a 20-minute video piece and you need to quickly measure, okay, what's my overall loudness? I'm just at the end, this thing is due in 15 minutes. How do I measure it really quickly without playing back the entire thing? This is not going to do that for you, which is kind of the downside of something like this. That's where something like the loudness meter over here in Isotope RX is nice, because I can take and just, this loudness control actually just measures the entire piece. So this is the integrated or program loudness right here. And this one is also nice because what it can do is it can actually also take the audio and normalize it. So you set your target here and you just click render. This will take it from -27 to -17. Now, I wouldn't want to just do it like that because you can see here it's basically brick walling this. There are probably better ways to do that. So what I would probably do is apply some compression first, and we've talked about that whole process before. I would just pull in a plugin here. I'd probably run it somewhere around there. So -11 for my threshold. And really, I'm only affecting, you can see just these peaks here. So I'm okay using a 6:1 ratio. Fast attack, 500 millisecond release. Let's go ahead and render that. You can see that pulled this down now. So now our true peak is -8.9. So we have enough room. I can go ahead and render this. And it's not, well, it's still chopped it off. Gonna have to do a little bit more than that. So let's undo that compression. Let's pull it back in. Let's maybe go to -12. We may have to do a couple passes here. I would, of course, normally listen to this before doing it just to make sure I understand what it sounds like before I applied the compression. All right, so we have 9.2, 7.6. We should have enough now. Why is it still squashing that? That's interesting. Oh, no? So anyway, you set your true peak ceiling here, target, your integrated loudness target, again, in this case, in -17. And you can also give it a loudness unit target. What is this here? Let's see. This is our tolerance. So this is just saying you have to get, when you're doing your math here and you're doing the processing, you have to get within one loudness unit of what my target is here. So you can see it actually ended up making it a little tiny bit louder at -16. But in any case, that's kind of the, from my point of view, the strength of something like this, as opposed to what we have in DaVinci Resolve. They're both legitimate. They're both, workflows are completely legitimate, whichever works better for you. But the reason that I really appreciate Isotope is that it gives me an opportunity to, once I've bounced out the entire mix, I can bring it in here to do the final mastering and loudness normalization. So that's typically how I do that workflow. All right. Let's go to the chat here and take a look. I think we've had, you said there are some clarifications and possibly some questions from earlier on. Let's go take a look at, see what we've got here. Mike says, point of order. SPDIF equals Sony Philips digital interface, DIF. That's what the DIF stands for, is digital interface. So yes, Sony Philips. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that.
Same thing.
Sorry, you're right. Sorry, Philips, not Panasonic. My mistake. Thank you, Ajushi.
I think you answered this one, but...
ADAT is, yeah, well, ADAT is, yeah, it can transfer up to 8 channels of digital audio. If you go up to the higher sample rates, I think at 192, it only does 2 channels. You'll want to look at the specification if you need to know the details. These, but incidentally, these two, you're not seeing these on consumer grade. Well, you're seeing less and less of these optical formats, or the connections and interconnect formats. It seems like some of the professional grade gear still carries it. So for example, my Apollo X6 does have ADAT in and out. But certainly on the lower end gear, you're not seeing it nearly as much as you were. I don't know about consumer, like hi-fi gear. I'm not sure. I'm not really into that world, so I don't know what that looks like. But yes, it is able to send multiple channels, if that's what you meant by multiplexing. Bangs Naughty Bits, for amateurs doing common podcasts or YouTube, it's hard not to just show them a phonic and call it done. Yes, that's a great point. And in fact, one of the other meters that I didn't talk about here, and let's just go into Audition. Let me just show you this here. But one I'm very fond of that is entirely free is the, let's see, do I have it on here? I used to have it on here fairly recently. I'm not seeing it now. It's not under restoration. It shouldn't be. It should be under tools. Anyway, I did have on here the Julian loudness meter, and I would recommend if you are on a tight budget and you need a loudness meter, that is an excellent choice. There's a pro version, which does cost, but there's also a free version, and the free version is incredibly capable. and definitely highly recommended. So that's a free version. Auphonic, of course. Auphonic can take care of things if you're doing post-processing and you don't want to, or you don't have time to, or whatever the case may be in terms of learning how to loudness normalize manually and kind of tune the sound yourself. Auphonic allows you to just feed the audio to it. You can upload it, or you can download and purchase their desktop application. Just run it through that and it'll take care of it for you. It does a pretty good job, I would say. Most of the time it actually sounds really good. Every once in a while with certain clips, it just doesn't seem to quite pull it off as well. But it does also have some other features in terms of denoising and things like that. So lots of options out there. So thanks for that, Bangs. Why are you choosing -17 LUFS for the iZotope demo? Are you aiming for the -14 LUFS stereo standard for Amazon and Spotify? Okay, so first of all, let's be very careful. They're not standards. They are the choices that those companies have made in terms of how they were going to do loudness. And usually for online content, my personal recommendation, also recommendation from my friend Paul, I believe you say his last name, Figiani. He does podcast editing and post-processing professionally, so that's his work. His recommendation is actually -16 LUFS. And that's basically -16 or 17. I think he usually lists -16 as his target. And the reason he does that is that it makes it loud enough so that people listening to a podcast on consumer grade, potentially poor quality gear, and those are not synonymous, by the way. I'm talking about specifically like low quality earbuds in airplanes, cars, buses, trains, things like that. His personal opinion is that's loud enough so that they should be able to play that back and hear it well enough. The streaming services like Spotify, Amazon, and lots of the others, they have generally targeted -14, and they're coming at it from a very different perspective. Their perspective is they're coming from the popular music world where for years and years now, audio has actually been mastered to loudness levels far beyond -14. And in fact, if you play back audio, say for example from Spotify, and in fact we can do that. I can't let you hear it, but I can run it through my loudness meter. So let's do that. Let's go to the Mac here. Okay, I'm going to bring up some music here. Actually, take it off. Take it to the overhead camera. I don't want you to see what music I'm going to pull up here. Just as a kind of a surprise to you. I'll tell you what it is eventually, but let's just pull up. Actually, you know what? Let's just play. I can just play the intro song through Spotify. So here's Utah. Well, actually, this is a different. I'm not going to say. I just did say, just now. I don't have it there, but I've licensed some of this music before. So this is from my other channel. So we'll use that. So I'm going to you can go ahead back to the Mac here. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to specify the app as Spotify. So that's where I'm going to get the audio from. We're going to run it through the Clarity M and then we'll play it back. Actually, but I'm going to mute it so that you can't hear it. Okay, go ahead and switch back to the overhead. Okay, so first what I need to do is mute the audio so that you don't hear it on your end here. Why are we being so careful and cagey about this? The reason we are is that I do not have this song licensed to play back on this stream, so that's why I'm turning it off. I'm going to go ahead and bump it back up to 0, but just entirely mute it. Okay, now I'm going to start playing it back. I'm going to go ahead and first reset the meter. There's a reset button here. Now we're going to start playing the song. Okay, so that's coming through. Here it comes. All right, so that's the start of the song. Right now we have -23. Watch what happens here. Oh, that's pegged up against the top already. So let's go ahead and pull that down and see to a different target. We're going to go, let's say -14. Again, that's the target that is used on most of the streaming services. And this was a song that was actually created within the last 3 years, I believe. And you can see on the short term, 10-second, it's already louder than -14. The program loudness is coming through at -14.5 right now. But I think you're going to see that come up as the song progresses and it kind of builds a little bit. So you have to understand, we can go back to the main camera, you have to understand that popular music is coming from this world of loudness wars where they've been mastering way beyond, way louder than minus 14 LUFS. And basically what a lot of the streaming services decided was, you know what, let's kind of quell this war a little bit, and we're going to stream everything at minus 14 LUFS. And basically what happens there is if it is mastered louder than that, it will still, of course, play back, but it will be, if you actually watch the loudness meter, what happens is it's basically pegged. They've actually intentionally pulled it down so that it doesn't play back louder than minus 14 LUFS. So for spoken word dialogue, spoken word material, I generally find minus 14 can start to sound too crunchy, and that's the reason why I typically go for minus 16 or minus 17 LUFS for spoken word content. I find that, again, that minus 14, with certain voices in particular like mine, it just sounds over-compressed and it's kind of hard to listen to. If you get it down to minus 16 or minus 17, it still retains some dynamics, a little bit more dynamics, and it sounds a lot more pleasant if you're going to be listening for a long time. So that's typically why I target minus 16 or 17. So that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. All right. Any others? Nope. Okay, that's it for now.
Good discussion, though.
Good discussion in the chat. Thanks for that, people. Okay, let's hop into our questions here. So Richard S. actually talks about, or asks, actually not, the only question is this. Have you ever tried the TC Electronics Brickwall HD True Peak limiter? And my answer is no, I have not. It's not because I don't like it or don't think it's a good idea, but I just haven't. This plugin, this is what Richard says about its use. This plugin is fantastic and is the only plugin that I am aware of that you can measure LUFS and then be able to click set the gain in LUFS at whatever level you like. In the example below, I have the LUFS set to minus 14 LUFS. Then all you do is click set gain, listening, and apply. And this is what the UI looks like for those that are curious about it. So actually go back to the super source. Yeah, there we go. That's what it looks like right there. This one's an interesting one, actually, and let me just pull something up here on the Mac about this. Here we go. If we come over to the Mac. So here's the TC Electronic site. You can see TC Electronic actually is, they really kind of jumped on the loudness units full scale metering bandwagon. So they have a variety of products, and this is one that they have in addition to that. So it's a software limiter that is capable of measuring true peak, dB true peak max, and also loudness units full scale. And it will actually also essentially just push the levels up and limit at the same time that you're doing that to reach a specific loudness units full scale target. So from my point of view, this could be really useful. I would still want to generally do, if I'm not doing it real time, I would still generally want to do some sort of compression. Actually, even if I am doing it real time, I would still want to do some compression first on at least some voices that tend to be more dynamic. Certain voices you can get away with just pushing it through a limiter, but some voices actually do need, I think, a little bit more compression first before you push them through a limiter, just to keep them sounding good. Just because they tend to be a little bit more dynamic. I think my voice is one of those, in fact. But this one's interesting. So it does all of that, but it also has this hardware component optional. So if you wanted to be able to change the settings on this particular plugin in real time, they have this dedicated controller that allows you to do that as well, which is very interesting. TC Electronic is interesting from that standpoint because they are both a hardware and a software company. So they kind of do a little bit of each. So kind of an interesting thing. So thanks for sharing that, Richard. I really appreciate that. All right, we did have another question from Rich. Rich says, and this is a kind of a Final Cut Pro 10 question. And actually, incidentally, I just realized this a couple months ago. It's no longer Final Cut Pro 10. It's now just Final Cut Pro. They changed the name once Big Sur was released because now Big Sur is Mac OS 11. So presumably they wanted to get rid of the 10 on all of the other product branding. But what's the best workflow for Final Cut Pro if I want to use Audition to work on the audio? Should I export the audio from each interview, work on it in Audition, then re-import back into Final Cut Pro before I begin editing that interview for the video? Right now, I may have 6 different clips from multiple people in the edit timeline, so I don't think it's a good idea to export the audio from the multiple sources like that. and treat it like a single file, right? I'm currently taking your dialogue post with Audition, which I recommend. I've not gotten to the part about workflow just yet. Just to confirm, you prefer a standalone audio editing solution versus using the tools in Final Cut Pro 10. Yes, I definitely prefer using a proper digital audio workstation to do a mix like that. Now, you can get away with it sometimes in Final Cut Pro, and in fact, the workflow that you talk about is generally what I do for my YouTube videos. So I almost always do the mix first and then bring that into Final Cut Pro, do the edit. All I have to do in Final Cut Pro then basically are crossfades between any cuts, and then I already know that it's at my loudness target and I'm ready to go. So that's one way you could do it. It's a little bit more complex when you have 6 people. So when you have 6 people, if they're doing an interview or it's a dialogue scene in a film of some sort, that's where I really feel like I need to be at least in a digital audio workstation of some sort. And so what I do is I use an app called, what is it called? FC. I got to remember if I even have it on here. Don't switch over yet. Let me do a little search here first. What I need, and I haven't done it for a while, which is why I'm looking, but there is an app called, let's see. It's called X to CC, the letter X, TOCC. And basically what it does is you export an XML from Final Cut. You run that through the X to CC little app, and then it creates an XML that you can then bring into Adobe Audition. That's typically how I do it. Then when I'm done with the mix in Adobe Audition, I just render that out as a stereo mix. Usually I'm doing stereo. Actually, always I'm doing stereo. I'm not doing surround mixing. So render that out as a stereo mix, as a single file. Then I can bring that single file right back into Final Cut Pro, mute all of the other original audio, and then I have my mix. And that's how I typically would approach that. So it depends on what you're doing. If you have something that's a little bit more straightforward where you don't have to go into another app, and actually, to be honest, and just to clarify things, with the Adobe Audition post-processing course, that's strictly about processing a single track. It's not really, it doesn't go into mixing, and that's an entirely different topic that I hope to someday cover in a course as well. So, and we do cover it to some extent in our Fairlight course, but of course, I don't think that's what you're looking for. But in any case, the reason I say that is working with if I have 6 different tracks of audio, I want to be able to, say, for example, there are 6 characters in a scene that you're shooting. In most cases, 5 of those people are going to be quiet while one person's talking. And so I don't want all the room tone and noise that the other 5 microphones are picking up to be playing through while that one person's talking. So I'm going to go in and actually what is called railroad, and I'm going to cut out the parts of silence for each person who's not talking on their track while the person who is talking is talking. So the idea is that you get a much cleaner mix in the end that way. And that's really, really just challenging to do in something like Final Cut Pro 10. It's a little bit easier in something like Premiere, which is a track-based editor. But as soon as you go trackless like Final Cut Pro, it just gets really hairy and crazy and not fun. So that's why I always go over to Audition. Now, some people will ask, why don't you go to Logic? Isn't that easier? It is easier to actually do the round trip to Logic. But the reason I go to Audition is just because of familiarity. I'm more familiar with Adobe Audition. I just know how it works better. I've used it longer. I'm more comfortable there. So you could do it either way. So thanks for the question, Rich. Hope that helps a little bit. All right, let's go back and see what we've got in the chat. Danny's going to comb through for just a minute here and see what we've got. Part of the reason, just to talk about the hardware meter here, the TC electronic hardware meter, one of the ideas here is that if I am in a situation where I'm doing a mix for a live stream or some other sort of, really pretty much for a live stream, it gives me a way to insert this at the end of the audio signal chain and get a really good read of where we're at. So that's where it's going to be of utility for me. That's the idea there.
Here's a check-in.
Here's a check-in.
2 parts.
2 parts. From Omid, if you remember, I asked about the Rodecaster Pro's noisy headphone outputs in a couple of weeks ago. As far as I know, most, if not all, Rodecaster Pros have that problem. The solution is to use
Drum roll.
a pair of high-impedance headphones. Tried a pair of DT770s, 250 ohms, and the noise is completely gone. Just wanted to let you know about it in case someone else asks you about it. That's really interesting. That's actually probably the inverse of what most people would expect, I think. So Omid, thanks for sharing that. That's great to know. Thanks for following up on that. Hugo, off topic, I'm using delay on mic 1 ATEM to get audio video in sync. Can you get sound on headphones without the delay? It's really annoying to get the delay echo on headphones. Danny, do you have a delay?
I do.
Danny does have a delay. I have not found a way to do that, unfortunately. You'd have to have some pretty expensive, very low latency hardware to accomplish that. And we don't do it that way. Obviously, the what Danny is listening to and what I'm listening to when I put my headphones on here is the headphone output jack on the ATEM Mini Extreme. I have that routed over into a Little Labs monitor, which is basically a headphone amp, and it has a couple of outputs, so we can both listen at the same time. So that's as close to the end of our signal chain as we can get, which is generally what you want to do, so you can make sure you hear everything in the stream. And that does still have a delay. So that's why I don't wear my headphones or in-ear monitors through the whole stream, is because there is a delay. So as soon as I put this on, I'm hearing myself at probably, if I had to guess, at least a quarter of a second delay. So it can become really disorienting. That's the trick, is if you're live streaming and you're doing all of the technical direction yourself, that's a challenge that I haven't found a way to resolve.
One ear off helps.
Yeah, Danny did bring up a good point, having one ear off. So if you do this, that can be really helpful. That way you can still hear what's coming through, but it's not so disorienting. It looks a little funny unless you're using in-ear monitors, but that's something to consider. That can make it a little bit more tolerable. Thanks, Hugo. That's a good question, and I wish I had an answer for it.
I'm not sure if you covered this plugin. But...
Techno Cheesecake. There are plugins too. Yes, absolutely. Waves has a good one. Youlian is a good free plugin version. Yes. So we talked about Youlian. That's how it's spelled, incidentally. Youlean. And I'm not as familiar with the Waves, but yeah, I'm not surprised that Waves. Just be careful going to Waves. Waves has about 10 million plugins, and many audio engineers have gotten lost and never been found again because they went to the Waves website and never came out. So just be careful over there. There's a lot going on.
Here's a follow-on to that.
Mike says, I have Youlian, good, but needs to be real-time. My audio editor can now measure LUFS in non-real time quicker and produces the same readings as Youlian. Okay, very good. Yeah, I've actually used Youlian for setting up live streams. So when we had Doc on... Doc Justice on a couple of weeks, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever that was. Before we started the stream, we actually were in the green room and we brought Youlian on in Audio Hijack, just like we did here. And we brought it on as another participant from another computer into the green room. And then we each talked for a little bit, got our levels set to minus 23 LUFS, and that made for a much better stream. So people weren't straining to hear one of us and then turning the volume down to hear the other one of us. So that it can actually work, and in that case, it works in close enough to real time to work for setting up a live stream. A question: is there any advantage to using Handbrake before uploading to YouTube? Does it mean that YouTube FHD is quicker? I don't know. I just export directly from Final Cut and then upload from there to YouTube, and I haven't done any sort of experimenting with that. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I would trust. It's going to get re-encoded again, so probably doing fewer re-encoding stages is a good thing with a lossy format like H.264, which is what we're generally uploading to YouTube. I would probably not use Handbrake unless your source footage is not. Well, I don't know. I don't know what your source footage would be, but I would export directly from the video editing app and just go straight to YouTube. It's generally what I do. It's going to convert that H.264 to VP9 anyway, which is what it generally plays back when you're using you're using any browser except for Safari. I think almost all the browsers support VP9 now. So in any case, it's going to re-encode it anyway. So I don't know if there's a big advantage to re-encoding yourself. So I guess that workflow would be export from your video editing app, go through Handbrake and re-export, and then upload to YouTube, where it then re-renders it into VP9. It also makes an H.264 version so that anyone playing YouTube in Safari also has, or maybe it's H.265, I'm not sure, but whatever, it's re-rendering a couple of different versions. So I probably wouldn't go to the trouble unless you can see some sort of tangible visual difference. Bangs, is there a convenient location to find all your affiliate codes for easy reference? On my website, there is a gear page where it's not all of them, but it's a kind of it's a lot of them. And I'm actually in the process of redoing my web page using Webflow, incidentally, which is where I now work for my day job. And that's going to be changing a little bit. It'll be a little cleaner. Right now, the one that's up there, I'm a little embarrassed about. It just, it's grown and grown and grown and grown over the years, and it's a bit of a mess. But yeah, if you go over to learnlightandsound.com and you go to the gear tab, you'll see a lot of things there. Also over at kit.co, although I'm not a huge fan of kit.co. Okay, Boulder Surfer. For Rich, there's an updated white paper, Audio Roles in Final Cut Pro, that explains quite a bit and should be useful. Search on the quoted title. There you go. Thanks for that, for Rich. So Rich's question was about the workflow for Final Cut Pro. So actually bring that back up for a second here, real quick, from Boulder Surfer. Audio roles in Final Cut Pro, yes. So audio roles can be helpful, but if you're doing like a proper film mix, it's still pretty crazy. But yes, that's a good point, Boulder Surfer. There are some facilities in Final Cut for essentially compensating for the fact that it's not a track-based editor. So you can essentially assign each audio clip a specific role, and then you can manage things by roles as opposed to by tracks like you normally would in most other digital audio workstations or nonlinear editor video apps. So thanks for that, Boulder Surfer. Thanks for clarifying the roles capability. That can be helpful. Techno Cheesecake, question for you. Can you go through weighting and what they mean and how they are measured? Probably not today, but yes, we could definitely pull up, do a future discussion on that. It's a good idea, and talk about the different weighting scales that are used in audio. A weighting is a very common one. K weighting is another very common one. There's some others as well. So it's a good suggestion. Appreciate that.
Type the link in for the gear page. What is it?
Oh, just at learnlightandsound.com. That's it.
Okay.
And
there'll be a
then and then click on gear.
Okay.
We need to get a microphone for Danny, I think. And is Emma out there today? Has anyone seen Emma? She's there. Okay, good. Hope you're doing well, Emma. All right, Boulder Surfer. A tricky thing is that in Final Cut Pro, clip roles and component roles are handled differently and can cause confusion, hence the white paper recommendation. Thanks for sharing that as well. Yes, things can get pretty hairy in there. I will say this, the reason I edit in Final Cut Pro is because editing is an absolute, from my perspective, once you get a hang of the magnetic timeline, it's a dream to actually cut video in Final Cut, I think. I much prefer it to any of the other track-based editors, and I've used most of them. The only one I haven't really used much is Media Composer from Avid, but definitely Final Cut versus Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, any of the other track-based editors. I really prefer how it manages. And it just, to me, I feel I can do an edit faster, just easier. So, hey, Darren, thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Thanks for coming by today as well. Mike, regarding Handbrake, I agree with you, but others have urged me to use Handbrake. My source is a .mts. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with .mts. I assume that's a container that contains H.264 footage. Yeah, if anyone else knows about that, please, if you wouldn't mind helping out our friend Mike here. And any advice you have on that front would be greatly appreciated. Don't get lost in the plugin sauce. There's some sage advice from Emma. We've had this conversation many times. It is very easy, again, to go over to Waves or any other place. Another place I found myself trapped and I haven't purchased yet. FabFilter has some amazing looking plugins that I am very tempted by, but I've never purchased them. TC Electronic is another place that have some really great looking. Another one is, what's it called? I went to their booth at NAB a few years ago. It's not Eventide. Anyway, there's some others. Just be careful. She's right. Don't get lost in the sauce there, as they say. I think that .mts is a Sony container. Oh, so maybe it sounds like, Mike, you're just pulling footage straight out of your camera? Are you editing it all before you upload? So yeah, I would probably at least put that into a video editing app and probably do something with it. Maybe title it or whatever you're going to do. But yeah, I would probably do that through a video editing app. We got time for a couple more. If you would just put @CurtisJuddAudio in your thing there. We have just probably 4 or 5 more minutes here. Thanks, Daniel, by the way. I appreciate that. I haven't shot with Sony cameras for quite some time, so I'm not familiar with extensions.
That was from the Loudness.
Ah, very good. Regarding the Loudness. Thanks, Mike. Hey, by the way, Mike, when's your live stream start? Please let us know. Edit Ready can handle MTS files. Some input for you there, Mike. So thanks, Boulder Surfer. I'm using Sony and Canon camcorders. Yes, definitely editing. Okay. Yeah, I think in your export format, you'll probably want to choose like an MP4 or, ideally, I don't know if you're on a Mac or PC, but on PC, we usually use the .mov container. And I usually export H.264 in a .mov container for YouTube is what I do. I'm not sure, but I think you might be able to upload H.265 now, and I haven't done any testing with that. So that's a possibility as well.
Oh, we already handled that.
We already got that. Greg, hey, it's great to hear from you, Greg. Do you know of any real-time hardware spectrographs? Ooh, not off the top of my head, but that would be an interesting one as well. Definitely for solving problems, certainly in live situations, but I don't know of any. That's a great idea. Just RTAs. RTAs are kind of the bread and butter of that world, it seems like, but I could see how a spectrograph could be useful as well. The live stream was canceled. The curse of COVID. Hopefully over soon. This is a basic question. What is the minimal kit for a location sound recordist? I would say the minimal kit is a recorder and a boom microphone and a boom pole. That would be the minimal kit. It depends on the situation. Oh yeah, of course, headphones that go with that too. Danny just reminded me. You have to have headphones so you can monitor, but that would be the minimum. And it depends on what you're doing as well. In some cases, boom mic is not even something that's possible, so you might have to have a wireless kit instead. But I would say in my cases, when I have had the most minimal kit ever, it was something like a Sound Devices Mix Pre, a boom pole, a shotgun microphone on the end of the boom pole, and a set of headphones. And we were able to create a short narrative film with that. So there we go.
This was sent to the group, but you could probably...
Oh, so good question for the group. What to buy first, wired or wireless lavalier microphones? Good question. Again, it depends on what you're doing, Linda, from my perspective. I'll go ahead and jump in as part of the group. Hopefully that's okay. I think it depends on what you're doing. A lot of times, I've had a surprising number of law firms contact me and say, hey, I'm looking for a wired lavalier microphone to record depositions. So they're looking for a lavalier microphone with an XLR output so that they can just connect it directly to the camera or to a mixer and then the mixer to the camera so they can record depositions. So in those cases, a wired probably makes sense. If, on the other hand, you're going to be doing anything where people are moving around, that's where I think wireless really probably makes sense. But I would also say that you have to be careful. The consumer grade wireless can get you a long ways. For years I used the Rode Wireless. What's it called? I don't even remember what it's called now. RodeLink. It's called RodeLink. So I used that system for a number of years, even for paid jobs, and they can get you pretty far. There are cases where that starts falling down, though. The ability to hold a signal in really tough situations like wide open outdoors, they don't do as well out there. That's true with almost all of the consumer grade wireless, certainly the 2.4 gigahertz consumer grade wireless. So if you do a lot of shooting outdoors in the wide open, where there aren't a lot of walls and other barriers nearby, those tend to fall apart quickly. But in any case, there's some thoughts for you there on that. All right, it is time for us to wrap up today. Let me just get things queued up here. So let's actually switch to the Mac really quickly here so I can show people this. This is what I typically do. I have the computer muted right now, but I'm going to unmute that so that I can play back the music as we say goodbye for another week. So we'll go to our main camera here. Have a great week, everybody. Get out there and make some great sound. Talk to you soon.